the movie that asked the question, what if save scumming was a superpower? Alright, hey guys, I'm back again with a whole bunch of movies I've been watching over the course of the years, haven't had time to sit down and record them. I'm going to try at least get this one done now, because I know this is kind of the one that a lot of people have been talking about lately. Granted, I'm probably a little late to the party, which I don't think is a bad thing, and I'm going to explain why. I'm actually glad I didn't jump right on the bandwagon when this movie first came out, because there's been a weird, social reaction to this film that I feel like needed time to settle so we can have a more mature discussion about it. Not just the movie itself. Let me be clear, the movie is bad. I'm not gonna stay here defending it. It's a bad movie. It's ill-conceived. It feels like no one really wants to be here. This movie feels butchered in the production stage of things, which again is one of those facts I'm glad I waited until after the movie came out, or at least after a little while the movie came out, to finally kind of discover more about the behind-the-scenes stuff before I went and talked about it. Because this is one of those films that for some reason, and I say for some reason knowing entirely the reason why, has people on the internet, particularly on Twitter, just frothing at the mouth to hate this thing. And not just it's a bad movie, let's make fun of it kind of a way. People for some reason are very invested in every critic imaginable, just shitting on this movie in a creative way. It just more than average. I have not seen this kind of reaction for a bad movie in a while. Morbius, despite how much that got memed to death, didn't quite get this kind of vitriolic response. And that's usually regards to what's his name? That one critic or a YouTuber who got kind of to deep water, not deep water, but got into some controversy, quote unquote, about this movie. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Stuckman. That's right, Chris Stuckman, who kind of refused to review the movie on its own merits, and people got really angry about that for some reason, and to ways that still I don't want to say baffle me, but it's just weird. It was a weird reaction to have. And it really does remind me of the reaction that the Marvels got, despite the fact that I think it's a good movie, despite what people on the internet try to convince you. And it's not hard to see the connecting tissues on why this one in particular is getting the same kind of frothing at the mouth desire to hate this film that the Marvels did. It's because it's directed by a woman and has female leads. And I wish, this is not entirely hyperbolic. This is not me speculating. There's people on the internet that have directly made this connection. I know executives have said, oh, well, I guess you just can't have women leads. This just don't make money. That's the kind of direction it's going. There's even a report recently that said, the producers are angry at Dakota Fanning for, not take responsibility for the shitty movie, despite the fact she clearly doesn't want to be here either. But it is very clear that it's the same people who are super invested on hand on everything that was the Marvels are now the same people, and I need everyone to be on the same page about Madam Web. Now, I don't think you get many defenders of Madam Web as a good movie, a good bad movie maybe, because I saw this with Lena, we did laugh our ass off the entire time. But it is that same crowd, and they are weaponizing it for the exact same reasons. And I wish... It sucks that that's the case, because it really does make it hard to talk about it as a movie, with taking apart all the cultural crap out of it. But at the same time, you do kind of need to address it, because it is part of a larger cultural problem. It's so weird. Madam Web is such a weird place in this movie superhero landscape. Not just because it was an ill-conceived idea, not because it was clearly Sony just trying to keep the Spider-Man IP and trying to make whatever money they can outside of the MCU stuff. So they picked an obscure character that they can milk an hour-and-a-half movie on and try to farm that for whatever money they can get out of it. And I was surprised when it didn't do very well. By the way, I apologize, I'm stuffing my nose is a little, stuffed up. So... going from the cultural issue to this movie itself, yeah, it's not good. It's a bad movie. I want to say maybe it could have been good, but I don't think there was ever gonna be No, that's not true. Let's talk about that too, because another really big controversy that came out of this was a lot of people are shitting on the writers and the directors and everything else, people involved in this, for the quality of the movie. And I'm not saying they don't get a share of the blame for the final product that come out, but just by everything I've heard, and even like some of the stuff Dakota Fanning has said, is it Dakota Fanning who was in this one? I know it's Dakota something. My nose is really stuffed up. Who kind of set out and said like, yeah, there was a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There was a lot of people like producers and stuff that were kind of making this by committee. There was a lot of studio interference. Dakota Johnson, not Dakota Fanning. Dakota Johnson. I'm sure someone's already typed on the comments correcting me before they got to this part of the video, but be that as it may, Dakota Johnson has gone on record and saying like there's a lot of studio interference. There's a lot of producers who tries to make this by committee, kind of like paid by number. They just kind of just flattened everything out that might have been interesting about it. It was a big gigantic mess. So I don't like when you take that into account. I don't even know how fair it is to blame the writers. Even though like I know one of the writers worked on like Dracula Untold and Gods of Egypt, and again, I don't know how much of those movies suffered from studio interference, because those were also kind of made by committee movies, even though I do kind of unironically love Dracula Untold for how stupid it. Actually, I by definition, I guess we ironically love that movie, but be that as it may. Yeah, it's very clear that a lot went on behind the scenes. There were some ill-conceived ideas that go up throughout this movie. But again, for those who have not seen this movie or don't know about this movie or have not really been exposed to the internet stuff in the way that I have, that I can talk about this stuff, Madam Web is based on a Spider-Man character that is basically an old woman a blind old woman in a chair that spouts exposition and quests to Spider-Man. That's more or less been her entire thing. For most of her comic book appearances, there is a newer version, someone take on the mantle of Madam Web now in the comic books. Who's a different character. I think it's one of the Spider-Women. I took on the mantle. This is not that. This is the old blind woman they're doing of. And for some reason, it's Dakota Johnson playing her. And in this version, Dakota Johnson is a medical person who. God, what is her profession? Paramedic. I am just failing at words today. A paramedic who, through various circumstances, ends up with these kind of power to see the future, and it's connected to a bunch of spider people because it's about a spider that she was that her mother was bitten with while she was in the womb, which I guess gave her like future-seeking powers for some reason, but her mother was killed by this other character named Ezekiel, who I actually know in the comics. Actually, a fun fact, Ezekiel Sims was one of the first characters I read when I first started getting comics, because JMS's Spider-Man run was on the first Spider-Man run I ever read. So I actually really like Ezekiel Sims as a character. I don't know what Tar him is doing with it. Like, he kind of has a weird unidentifiable accent for the most of the movie. It's not really the character, but then again, none of the characters in the movie really are, so that's kind of one of those things you just kind of we're just gonna sail past it, fuck it. So she starts discovering that she has these powers, and along the way, Ezekiel, who I guess also can have visions for some reason, discovers that there's these three women who are destined to become Spider-Women, and together they would team up to eventually kill him. So he decides to try to kill them first before they get their powers. They had to run into Dakota Johnson, Madam Web, and then the rest is kind of a cat and mouse chase of her trying to protect these girls who are stupid as hell, and Ezekiel Sims trying to wear his Spider-Man's makeshift Spider-Man outfit to kill the girls. One thing I made a joke to Milena while we were watching this is I was kind of joking. It's like, so in this universe, there's still Spider-Man because Ben Parker shows up as like her EMT buddy. And there's a scene where fucking Emma Roberts, who plays May Parker, gives birth to Peter. So Spider-Man exists in this universe. Sure, whatever. But that also means that Peter Parker would eventually just don the suit of a serial killer to become Spider-Man. And there's a lot of kind of jokes like that you can make and laugh about. Because it is a very silly concept. It's a very silly execution. A lot of it looks relatively cheap. A lot of it doesn't. None of it looks really very good. Dakota Johnson kind of has this great, I just am over this shit kind of vibe through a good majority of the movie. The girls do an admirable job of what they're given. I'll give them that, but it's just not a very good script. And again, I don't know what happened in between the pitch and the execution where everything just fell apart, but it's not good. It's unintentionally hilarious. But that being said, we did have a great time watching it. So I don't know, make it very worth. As far as like comic book relation stuff, like it's very loosely based on anything. So it's one of those. It's kind of like Morbius. You just take any comic knowledge you have and just leave it at the door because none of it matters, and that's fine. Adaptation doesn't mean directly 1-to-1, but you would at least hope that they would try to get something cohesive going, and it never really quite gets there. And yeah, the results are unintentionally hilarious. And I could probably go through every scene if I really wanted to and break down why it's hilarious and how ridiculous it all is. But I also don't want to contribute too strongly to the shitting on this movie while it's down part of YouTube. I feel like there's plenty of that already, and I don't want to contribute to this culture that is really just going at this movie because, again, it stars women and it's from a female director, and people are going to say, oh, no, that's not true. Yes, it fucking is. There absolutely is a problem with that. And I can both say this movie is bad and acknowledge that is also part of the problem. So I'm going to do both of that. And I feel like I've gone over it long enough. Madam Web, it's not a very good movie. It's very cheaply made. But I do think it's emblematic, or at least a reaction to it, is emblematic of a larger issue in film criticism, in YouTube culture in particular, where stuff like the vitriolic anger and need to destroy something has overtaken any ability for nuance, any ability to really talk about these films properly, to give nuance to these situations. Because outrage sells, and outrage sold very well when the Marvels came into theaters. And before people say, like, oh, they turns that towards it wasn't that bad, the review I made for that, and I'm a fucking nobody on YouTube, the review I made for that got the worst response and the most vitriolic response out of any video I have ever done, to a absurd degree. Like, to the point where it's like, oh, it's more people didn't like this than usual. It's like, no, it was targeted harassment for saying the movie was good. And I'm lucky it stopped when it did. And I'm lucky that I'm small enough that it didn't grow into something monstrous. And I'm seeing the same thing happen here. Again, Chris Stuckman, who's like made his own movies, he has his own opinion, he has his own desire to kind of like stay out of the negativity loop that YouTube is currently in. And I respect that choice. I really do. You're allowed not to like it, but the reaction he got out of it, and people saying that like he needed to fucking hate this movie, he needed to put it in its place, and this kind of shit just really speaks of a desire to enforce misogyny, particularly in Hollywood. And I say this mostly because like people of the same caliber that are this bad do not get the same kind of response that Madam Web did, that stars men. And I like, if you got an example, leave me in the comments, like, prove me wrong. I would love to be wrong, but I sure as hell haven't seen it. But I've seen it on this, and I saw it at the Marvels, and the Marvels was good. And it's just, it's fucking messy. It's gross, you know? And I just hate that that's what all of this has become. This is what this all has gone to. This is the culture we're now in on YouTube, where the hate market has grown so saturated and so overwhelming that if you don't toe that line, you will get blowback. And I'll be very curious how this video does. And it probably won't be, this will be a drop in the bucket in the conversations they've already been having, so I doubt it will have that big of an impact. But if someone also blows up and gets a big vitriolic response, then hell, I'll be proven right. So I guess I win either way. So, yeah, Madam Web, not a good movie. Definitely deserves the criticism it's received. But I think there's a larger problem that needs to be acknowledged with it. So, now granted, I'm not going to sit here and defend Sony as a corporation. This was obviously a cheap cash grab. This was obviously made with the most cynical reasons. And Sony, I'm not defending Sony. I'm not defending superhero movies. I'm not defending Marvel or anything like that. I am just defending Hollywood. I'm defending, like, the field of film criticism. I am trying to hope for better from people, and we can get away from this kind of blatant cynicism, this nihilism, this hatred that is just unhealthy for all of us. So I think that's enough of me and my soapbox. That's my opinion on Man and Web. There's a bunch of other movies I gotta talk about that I'll make time for in the near future. Until then, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you all later. Bye.